Welcome everyone to the 13th session of our monthly public lecture of the RIF's focal topic, Justice and Sustainability, which is also the first lecture in our second year of our focal topic. My name is Alexandra Toast, and I'm a research associate in the focal topic coordination team here at the RIFs, and I will moderate today's session. For everyone who is surprised by our new acronym, RIFs, we are not the ISS anymore. Since January, we are the RIFs, Research Institute for Sustainability, Helmholtz Center Potsdam. I'm very excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Benno Fladvad, who is not really a guest, since he has been a Justice Fellow at our institute since last year. And Benno's talk is titled Infrastructuring Environmental Injustice and Justice on the Political Geographies of Energy Technologies and Planetary Crises. Before we start with the lecture, I would like to briefly introduce our focal topic. Last year, for the first time, the Institute has defined an overall focal topic, and our goal is to deepen our understanding of the nexus between justice concerns and sustainability, and also discuss this internally and externally as the Institute. And today's lecture addresses several topics that are central also to our work. So some things that our guest will do today is to problematize the prevailing techno-utopianism inherent in mainstream sustainability debates on green transitions and ecological modernizations. And also the presentation will theorize the fundamental political character of infrastructures, especially energy technologies, which is also something that we have been looking at in our previous lectures and also in our general work here as a focal topic, and it will elaborate on some ideas that aim at overcoming and decolonizing growth and control-oriented sociotechnological imaginaries of Western modernity, but also at achieving greater autonomy and environmental justice directly through infrastructures. After this lecture, we will have a space for questions and discussion. You will then be able to use your microphone and your camera, or also comment or ask questions through the chat that will be moderated by my colleague Niklas Schäfer. So let me introduce Dr. Benno Fladvad. He is a human geographer with a focus on political geography, energy geographies, political ecology, environmental justice, and the coloniality of climate politics. He is a Justice Fellow at the RIFs and Research Associate at the Center for Advanced Studies Futures of Sustainability at the University of Hamburg, that focuses on different trajectories of sustainability and their contradictions and conflicts. He received his doctorate from the University of Kiel, where he worked until 2017 as a research associate to investigate the justice dimensions of the claim for food sovereignty in the Bolivian context. So thank you very much, Benno, for being here today, and the stage is yours for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alexandra. Just going to share my screen. Hey, that seems to work. Yeah, hello everyone. Also very warm welcome from my side. I'm also really happy to be here, to have the opportunity to talk here in this lecture series, and therefore also really want to express also my gratitude to the organizers of the series, to Alexandra Toast, Louis Coetzee, Bernardo Jurema, and Niklas Schäfer. So basically, what I want to do today is to discuss some ongoing work in progress, some ongoing conceptual considerations from my postdoctoral research activities here at the Research Institute for Sustainability and also at the University of Hamburg. So this involves, on the one hand, the relationship between material infrastructure and environmental justice. And in this regard, I'm focusing particularly on the emerging hydrogen economy, on green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. And on the other hand, they also include, as Alexandra also mentioned, the coloniality of climate politics and also attempts to decolonize climate action. So in addition, this presentation also ties into earlier reflections on the relationship between sustainability politics and democracy, more specifically on the question how the pursuit of sustainability risks constraining and undermining democracy. Okay, once explained the context of this talk, I would like to go directly into it. It is entitled Infrastructuring Environmental Justice and Injustice on the Political Geographies of Energy Technologies and Planetary Crises. So as for the structure, I will proceed in 3 steps in which I basically want to discuss 3 main theses. The first thesis states that mainstream decarbonization strategies are embedded in policies of ecological modernization and technological control that produce and reinforce environmental injustices and risk of depoliticizing debates around planetary futures. The second thesis, which is also going to be the main body of my talk, states that infrastructure as a research object, but even more as a conceptual lens, offers promising insights into the justice dimension of sustainability politics and its political geographies. And the third one states that infrastructures inhere a transformative power to bring about social change, to contribute to environmental justice, as well as to bring into being new societal relationships and forms of cooperation. So, and finally, after discussing these 3 theses, I also want to outline some preliminary thoughts on what might be called convivial infrastructures. So in general, then the talk will be rather theory-driven, but I will also try to make it a bit more tangible by illustrating my arguments with some concrete examples. Okay, to start with the first thesis, which refers to the tendencies of ecological modernization strategies to create and reinforce environmental injustices and to depoliticize debates around planetary futures. So first, some notes on sustainability politics. Following Adloff and Neckel's account of the futures of sustainability, which is a concept that assumes that sustainability consists of different and competing future paths, that is modernization, transformation, and control. We're currently witnessing that 2 of these trajectories, namely the trajectory of modernization and of control, are becoming very dominant right now. So the first one, maybe also the most dominant path, is the path of modernization, which, as I'm sure most of you know, is basically the idea of managing a planetary crisis, above all the climate crisis, through market-driven mechanisms and an unabated enthusiasm for technological innovation and modernization, for instance, in the form of green hydrogen, but also other technological innovations. So the basic idea behind this is thus to avoid systemic changes, to leave the growth paradigm untouched, and to hope for the power of markets and technologies to lead humanity into a good Anthropocene, as it is called in the Eco-Modernist Manifesto, which is a political declaration that was published by a group of techno-utopian scientists of the Californian Breakthrough Institute. So what we, however, can observe right now is how the modernization path, the idea of markets, the idea of technological innovation, is increasingly permeated currently and interwoven with the sustainability path of control. And the control path now has to be understood in a double sense. So on the one hand, in the sense of an authoritarian top-down politics that enables and securitizes global sustainability politics. So this can lead, for example, as this picture shows, to a militarization of green policies. And on the other hand, it can also be understood in the sense of the control of the Earth system by large-scale technologies, especially climate engineering technologies such as solar radiation management and carbon dioxide removal technologies such as carbon capture and storage, which is also currently very prominently discussed right now. So the increasing intertwining of market-driven forms of sustainability with sustainability policies of control is problematic for several reasons, at least for 2 reasons. First, it is problematic because it is indeed questionable whether markets and new technologies actually lead to an effective decarbonization of sustainability. As the political ecologist Alexander Dunlap argues, to speak uncritically of transition to renewables and to celebrate them sort of enthusiastically as the key solution to the climate crisis obscures, on the one hand, the fact that the increasing amounts of renewables also go hand in hand with an increasing amount of fossil fuel generation, as this chart of the global direct primary energy consumption shows. On the other hand, it also obscures the hidden socio-ecological costs of renewables, such as the mining of conflict minerals that are needed for the green energy transition. And for this reason, Alexander Dunlop also speaks not of a transition to renewables, but of fossil fuel plus infrastructures and technologies that enable a system that is sort of dressed up in green, but in reality continues to be extractive and unjust. In Dunlop's words, quote, "There's no renewable energy, but only fossil fuel plus infrastructures or technologies. Fossil fuel plus residuates so-called renewability by acknowledging the multi-layered and interconnected destruction that is invisibilized by supply webs, marketing, and people's willingness to believe in these technologies." End of quote. Secondly, the current techno-utopian and techno-managerial sustainability politics are also problematic because they involve a tendency to depoliticize debates around planetary futures. And this aspect is best understood if we consider that sustainability politics are embedded in the deeply depoliticizing Anthropocene discourse, which basically assumes that an undifferentiated humanity has caused the planetary crisis, and at the same time that this undifferentiated humanity is now also, should also now be in the position to solve the planetary crisis. And what makes this discourse really problematic is that on the one hand, within current sustainability debates, radical technological changes are being called for, while on the other hand, the current hegemonic socio-political order is implicitly declared as untouchable and as unmutable. And particularly the political ecologist Henrik Ernsten and Eric Swingedoe get to the heart of this matter in their 2019 book, which is called Urban Political Ecology in the Anthropocene, when they argue that, quote, "The proclaimed truth of the Anthropocene morally and scientifically inaugurates the necessity of radically new institutional and techno-managerial dispositives that can assure the continuation of civilization as we know it. In other words, we are summoned to change things radically to make sure that nothing really has to change," end of quote. So with this argument that nothing really has to change, they of course mean basically the continuation and the maintenance, the perpetuation of capitalism, neoliberalism, and extractivism. So, and a very good example of this techno-utopianism is actually the current hype around green and blue hydrogen, because basically it is feared that through the massive expansion of infrastructures such as renewables, pipeline, carbon capture and storage technologies, and transmission grids, there will be an increasing number of socio-ecological conflicts around land, fresh water, and natural resources, as well as the displacements of indigenous and local communities. And at the same time, the hydrogen economy also depoliticizes the sustainability debate by diverting attention away from urgent systemic changes and alternative perspectives such as degrowth, such as various indigenous visions and cosmologies. And therefore, as Tobias Kalt and Johanna Thun, also colleagues from the University of Hamburg, argue, there's an urgent need for a critical research agenda on hydrogen transitions and to investigate the potential for emancipatory hydrogen futures. So building on this consideration, I now turn to my second hypothesis, to my second thesis, namely that infrastructure is a research subject, as a research object, but even more as a conceptual lens offers promising insights into the justice dimension of sustainability policies and its political geographies. So first of all, why do I focus on infrastructures? First, because they are the means through which sustainability politics are being mediated and realized. And this is especially true for energy infrastructures and technologies such as wind and solar technologies, but also this is also true for pipelines, transmission grids, or LNG terminals. Moreover, a special focus on infrastructures is also important because they massively influence the future orientation of sustainability practices and policies due to their materiality, their durability. So in this regard, they sort of prefigure our future and therefore can also be seen as important leverage points for socio-ecological transformation, on which I will also discuss a bit later in this presentation. So therefore, it is not surprising that in recent years, there has been an increasing interest in a more critical take on infrastructures. Alejandro Esguerra, for example, he puts it this way: infrastructures are the production mills of the Anthropocene. This in turn aligns very well with Alf Hornborg's argument that energy technologies, infrastructures, are in fact material expressions or embodiments of asymmetric exchange relationships and environmental load displacement, which is basically also the argument I had made earlier of the deferring of environmental loads and social loads to other places that are being mediated through infrastructure and through energy technologies in particular. So in a very similar vein, Alexander Dunlop, whom I also cited earlier, explicitly speaks of an infrastructural colonization, which, as he puts it, quote, contends that infrastructure is a modality of conquest, serving as territorial weapons that, to various intensities, dispossess populations and roll out an apparatus of spatial, economic, and psychological management. Infrastructural colonization examines how infrastructure sustains conquest and chants people and normalizes socio-ecological plunder. End of quote. Therefore, Dunlop emphasizes, and I think this comes out very, very clearly in this quote, that the development of infrastructures such as wind energy, grid expansion is not simply a material matter in the sense that it takes a lot of space and that there are material and very visible objects that change energy landscapes. It is also a socio-material matter and also a psychological process that colonizes and shapes modes of thinking, habits of life, and social and political relations. So if infrastructure is not simply a passive material thing that sort of operates in the background, the question now is how we can approach them analytically. And a very helpful approach, which is in fact quite simple, is basically to adopt what is often called an infrastructural lens, which means to think of infrastructures not as a material and rather passive thing, but as a social relationship and as a social material practice. As infrastructuring, as the anthropologist Jörg Niewöhner puts it. So this epistemological shift from thing to practice now make infrastructures more accessible to ethnography, to ethnographic inquiry, but it also highlights the intertwining of infrastructural practices such as the maintenance, planning, repair, and the like with the social relationships upon which they depend and which they simultaneously produce. Therefore, in this way, it allows insights into the social dimension of infrastructures. Moreover, what an infrastructure lens also allows is to examine the role of infrastructure in the production of space. So not only in the form of changing energy landscapes, but also this is very interesting in the spatial construction of center and peripheries, which is brought about by infrastructural connections such as pipelines or transmission networks that transport energy from the periphery to the center. So basically said, without these connections, the periphery would not be the periphery and the center would not be the center. And finally, the shift from infrastructure to infrastructuring also allows insights into the justice dimension of infrastructures, particularly questions of political participation and procedural justice come to the fore. So this involves, for instance, decision-making processes about planning during planning processes, or also questions of control over and access to infrastructures. Distributional questions would then be, how are the environmental costs and benefits distributed? So who is positively or also negatively affected by them? And recognition-based or rather epistemological justice questions would include the questions of whose knowledge and what kind of knowledges are taken into account into the making of infrastructures. And this is, of course, of particular relevance when it comes to the question of local and indigenous knowledges, in particular with regards of infrastructural projects that are being planned in indigenous territories. So this also relates to another, but I think very essential dimension of infrastructuring, and this concerns, following the sociologist Bronislaw Cierczynski, not only to think of infrastructuring as a purely social practice, but also as an activity that is deeply influenced and is also shaped by non-human processes that often occur on other timescales, such as seismic, biological, or hydrological processes of the Earth system. So Ciecinski therefore urges us to look more closely at the interaction between the human-centered technosphere, the human-created technosphere, and the non-human spheres of the Earth system. Therefore, this rethinking of infrastructuring as a planetary phenomenon, as a planetary practice, therefore also requires a rethinking of human relationships with nature, namely to consider that nature is not a passive background for social activities, but that it is characterized by active and self-organizing processes. Therefore, given these considerations, it makes sense to think of infrastructures not only as an outcomes of politics, but as materialities that actively co-produce the social and the political, and which therefore have a massive influence on planetary future and how on the question how we deal with the planetary crisis. The political geographers von Velen and al. Put it, rather than just being conduits of already existing state power and politics, infrastructure projects act as a form of soft power governmentality by shaping and reconstructing societal norms and human behavior. Infrastructure does not just reveal an unchanged governmental will or deliver state effects, but actively participates in co-producing it. With this quote, this brings me to my third thesis, namely that infrastructures also inhere a transformative power to bring about social change, to contribute to environmental justice, and to bring into being new forms of cooperation. So far in this presentation, what I've done is mainly to analyze and to discuss the negative or the dark side of infrastructures, or also energy technologies. And I thought, although I think it is very important to maintain this critical perspective, I would now like to focus on, to say on the other side of infrastructures. And these thoughts are mainly influenced by two sources of inspiration, namely Bonnie Honig's notion of public things, and second, Arturo Escobar's decolonial approach to design theory. First, some comments on Bonnie Honig's notion of public things. Bonnie Honig she's a Canadian political theorist who has become very famous for her theory of agonism, for her agonistic theory of democracy. So in this regard, she particularly focuses on the importance of conflict for democracy, on the importance of dissent for democracy, and the creative, the productive relevance of conflict and dissent for democracy. In her 2017 book, Public Things, Democracy in Disrepair, she develops a very interesting approach, because what she does is to combine her political theory, her agonistic democratic thinking, with the power of material things. So especially with the power of material infrastructures. And what she does basically is to develop the idea that the political sphere, and thus democracy, is not a purely social activity, but that it also depends on material things that citizens mutually care for, but also struggle for. And conversely, what she also does is to argue that democracy, and therefore a just and egalitarian society, is not possible without commonly shared things, like, for example, and especially public infrastructure. Therefore, Honig argues that the shared interest in and the care for public things are therefore prerequisites for any democratic community. In Honig's words, public things furnish a world in which we encounter others, share the experience of being part of something that is larger than ourselves, and work with others, acting in concert. To share it, to democratize access to it, to maintain it. Public things are things around which we constellate and by which we are divided and interpolated into agonistic democratic citizenship. They are not innocent or pure. They are political. So in short, this tells us basically that infrastructures are not only sites of conflict and contestation, like I've shown earlier, and also sites of injustice, but also sites of collaboration. They can also be sites of the creation of new alliances and of self-organizing communities. Infrastructures in this respect have the power to bind people together and to give them a shared sense of living together and a shared orientation towards the common good. And in this respect, They provide what Honeck calls a common democratic holding environment that has the power to turn individuals and formally opposing groups into members of a democratic community. So, well, I think that these insights are very important when thinking about infrastructures in a political sense. What they did not do is to tell us, to give us insights into the transformative power of infrastructures. And this is precisely where the post-colonial theorist Arturo Escobar offers some guidance with his decolonial approach to design theory. In his 2018 book, Designs for the Pluriverse, he develops a very inspiring approach to design theory, which he calls autonomous design. And to understand autonomous design, it is first important to understand the concept of ontological design. Ontological design basically refers to the idea that the creation of things, such as infrastructures, always implies the creation of certain ways of engaging with the world, certain ways of being, as Escobar puts it. Moreover, Escobar also speaks of designs, which means that human-designed infrastructures always influence the way humans practice designing. Therefore, design has a world-building power and is at the same time influenced by the human-designed world. This does, however, not mean, and this is basically one of Escobar's most important point, that there's only one world. Instead, through the practice of designing, humans are able to design multiple worlds within one world, which is basically the notion of the pluriverse, a world in which many worlds fit, a world that accepts that there's not only the modern Western world, but that it is made up of many worlds, many ways of being, and many ways of relating to the earth. And now, given that Escobar places his design theory in the context of global transition narratives, as well as in the context of decolonial struggles in Latin America, particularly of peasant struggles and most importantly, indigenous struggles, it is also possible to explain the notion of autonomous design, which is about the creation of new worlds based on communal collaborative actions aimed at the pursuit of self-determination and aimed at the disentanglement from colonial ties and the creation of new relationships with the earth through the practice of designing. And I think that this thought is captured also very well in this quote by the STS scholars Caspar Brun-Jensen and Atsuro Morita, who argue that infrastructures can be understood as open-ended experimental systems that generate emergent practical ontologies. In doing so, infrastructures hold the potential capacity to do such diverse things as making new forms of sociality, remaking landscapes, defining novel forms of politics, reorientating agency, and reconfiguring subjects and objects, possibly all at once. So therefore, they also underline this world-making power of infrastructures, and also, in addition, put a lot of emphasis on the experimental character of infrastructures, and the emergent power of infrastructures to develop new worlds. Okay, to conclude my presentation, I will first summarize my central arguments and then also present some preliminary thoughts on what might be called convivial infrastructures. First, I have argued that current mainstream sustainability policies of ecological modernization and technological control are problematic because they tend to produce and conceal environmental injustice and the reinforcement of unjust power relations. And at the same time, they also tend to depoliticize urgent debates around planetary futures. Second, a focus on infrastructures, not only as a research object, but also as a conceptual lens, provides important insights into the political geographies and also into the justice dimensions of infrastructures. And this includes distributional, procedural, and recognition-based dimension, as well as epistemological justice creation, therefore questions of knowledge and what kind of knowledges are being integrated into planning processes, etc. And in this regard, in particular, the notion of infrastructuring that is encompassing both human and non-human processes holds great promise in this regard, because it allows researchers to approach infrastructures not just as a thing, but as an ongoing process, as a practice that is always political because it is imbued with social norms, values, and power relations, and which has profound social consequences because it produces spatially unequally distributed winners and losers. And third, I've also argued that infrastructures are not only sites of struggle and contestation, but also of collaboration and of the building of democratic communities. And particularly following Bonnie Honig's theory of public things, it becomes possible to see that infrastructures also have the power to unite people for collaborative action and democratic citizenship. Moreover, the practice of designing infrastructures, and this is basically Arturo Escobar's argument, has not only political consequences, but also ontological dimensions, which means that it has the power to create new worlds, new ways of being, and new social relations, and new human and non-human relationships. And basically, this is also what Dominic Boyer, an anthropologist, calls revolutionary infrastructure. That is, infrastructure projects and experiments that are often invisible and at the local level aim at transforming existing hegemonic infrastructures through a broad variety of experimental practices. And yet, while I do not think that the term revolutionary infrastructure is entirely misleading, I would prefer another name for these counter infrastructures that I think is better suited to capture the transformative power to bring about social change and also the collaborative power of infrastructures, and also the power of infrastructures to contribute to environmental justice, namely convivial infrastructures. So what is behind this? And first of all, what is behind the term convivialism or conviviality? Convivialism basically refers to, and I'm drawing here on the so-called Second Convivialist Manifesto that was designed by more than 300 scientists and activists around the world. It refers to a new mode and a new art of living together. On the one hand, it therefore represents a political philosophy that goes back to the work of Ivan Illich, Marcel Mauss, and more recently also Alain Calais and Frank Adloff. And on the other hand, conviviality also denotes a lived practice, a practice that places at the center the values of the plurality of human beings and of cooperation instead of competition. Moreover, and this is also a very crucial point, it also places at the center, it also focuses very much on the interdependence of human beings with each other and on the human beings, on the relationship of human beings with the earth, with non-human agencies. And in this way, convivialism sort of opposes both the logic of neoliberalism and therefore also of the human hubris of controlling the earth, for example, through large-scale infrastructures. And in contrast, convivialism emphasizes the importance and necessity of cooperation, of collaboration, both between humans, both between humans and non-humans. Sorry, that was wrong. So given these principles, in its most fundamental sense, then convivial infrastructures are therefore infrastructures that oppose the sustainability pathways of ecological modernization and of political and technological control. In contrast, what they do is they aim at creating greater autonomy and enabling the possibility of communal self-realization, of the self-realization and the dependence of communities. And basically, they therefore aim at collective care for the world. Finally, and this is also going to be my last point, there remains the question of how convivial infrastructures might look like in practice. And this can, of course, be only answered empirically. Nevertheless, I think there are also examples that are very worth exploring, that are at least from the outside, could be very good example of autonomous design practices and of convivial infrastructures. One of them is the example of some First Nations in Canada, who are not only resisting the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructures, particularly of pipelines, but who are also themselves increasingly undertaking autonomous renewable energy projects. And in this context, it is very interesting that some First Nation representatives also see green hydrogen not only as a threat of their way of being, so in terms of new environmental injustices, in terms of new socio-ecological conflicts, but also as a potential strategy for indigenous settler reconciliation, as well as for achieving greater energy autonomy and also for decolonizing energy systems and governance. In addition, these voices also emphasize the special relationship of indigenous communities to the earth. In doing so, some see hydrogen as a special opportunity for indigenous people to, quote, live up to their reputation as stewards of the land and build infrastructures in harmony and interaction with Mother Earth, as this was expressed by Chief Bill Morin of the Enoch Cree Nation in Edmonton, Alberta. Another example is the Solutionary Rail Initiative, that is a people-powered campaign for just and sustainable transportation and renewable energies. And what is behind this initiative is there's an organization that is called the Backbone Campaign, which basically has the vision to electrify America's railroad network and to address environmental justice directly through infrastructure. What is really interesting about this initiative is not only that it represents an infrastructural approach to environmental justice, but also a decolonial approach, because it explicitly focuses on indigenous rights and sovereignty and represents an attempt to turn the historical tools of colonization, so railroads that were being used for colonizing territories in settler times, into tools for environmental justice and decolonization. So they sort of take the tools that were meant for colonizing land for decolonizing land. And they do so, first of all, by reclaiming rights of way of indigenous territories, which is being called rights of way justice. And second, also by offering a market for indigenous renewable energy. So this is, like I presented earlier, this is basically renewable energy that is autonomously produced and controlled by First Nations, and which would otherwise be a stranded energy, because what they basically lack is a market for this renewable energy. So in addition, and this is also really interesting because we can see very well the extent to which Bonnie Honig's argument of infrastructures as sites of community building become reality. The Solutionary Rail Initiative also has the power to bring very diverse groups together, such as rail workers, the Canadian First Nations or parts of the Canadian First Nations, rural communities, and renewable energy companies. So this example then shows very well how infrastructures, or rather practices of infrastructuring, can contribute to conviviality. That is how they can contribute to the formation of new alliances, to new forms of collaboration, and also how they can contribute to achieving environmental justice. And speaking with the decolonial scholar activists Winona LaDuke and Deborah Cohn, infrastructures then are not only inherently good or evil. Pipelines can carry fresh water as well as toxicity. Infrastructure is how sociality extends itself. It is how life is provisioned or curtailed. In its most immediately material and graspable forms, infrastructure underpins and enacts sustenance and reproduction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benno, for this very interesting talk. Now I will open for the discussion. So if someone wants to pose a question or make a comment, you're welcome to virtually raise your hand here in the Zoom meeting, or write something in the chat. Okay, Ricarda Flemmer has the first hand raised. Can you activate your microphone? I guess my colleague Nicholas is now.
It should work now.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for this very insightful talk.
And I work on rights of nature, and we are now talking also here in Tübingen. I'm at the University of Tübingen about infrastructures, and it's very similar to the discussions that Benno so vividly and nicely explained and illustrated. And I'm interested in this epistemological or ontological dimension. I would be curious what you think if we should see law also as an infrastructure and as an instrument for transformation. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think we can start with the answer directly, and then we see if more hands come together for the next round.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question, and which I think is a really good question. First of all, I have to say that law is not my focus, and I'm focusing particularly on material infrastructure. Nevertheless, I think it is definitely possible to conceptualize law as an infrastructure, and it also should be conceptualized in this way. So particularly, I'm thinking of a little bit of conceptual approaches stemming from legal anthropology, that is also about not so much about having, this relates very much to the notion of infrastructuring, not so much about having only the law as an outcome, or focusing on the law as a thing, as an outcome, as something given, but also focusing on the practices of how law is being made, what kind of power relations are behind that, how, in what way different actors also struggle around law. So I think it is also in this way very, very important to conceptualize law. And there I see some relation to my talk, to this notion of infrastructuring as a process that is being struggled for. And this is also out of which emerge then as a result law that is written down, that has also binding power, but it can conceptualize in the same way. And therefore, specifically the work of the Bender Beckmans, I think, is very important in this regard. And since you talked about the rights of nature, this is basically also what would mean a huge ontological shift in this notion of law. What is law about? It's not only about structuring, about giving rules and obligations to social systems, but also thinking about a little bit more about the wider Earth system, about the non-human agencies, and also giving them rights, obligations, and to integrating them into the community of the law and of the right holders, basically. So yes, I think there's a big relationship to it, but these are the only spontaneous thoughts that I have about it, since law is not my focal topic.
Thanks. So now we have several hands raised. I would now collect 2 or 3 questions. So first is Mariana Calzagni.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Benno, so much for for sharing your knowledge and your research. It's really, really inspiring. I was wondering whether you have, I can imagine you have thoughts about like planetary boundaries and thinking about infrastructure within planetary boundaries, and to the whole idea of degrowth and this book Enough is Enough, from Dietz and O'Neill, like the idea to limit resource use, etc. And within that framework, the role of public policies in the global north, because for example, when we think of a Green New Deal or degrowth proposals for the global north, convivial infrastructure sounds like a great idea, but as you mentioned, I think you are more focused on indigenous communities or First Nations. I was wondering, how can we think about this, not for like indigenous communities, that of course is really important, but like to change the model, like the growth model, and there, what is the role of public policy? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So next I have Manuel Rivera.
Yes, can you hear me? Is this working? Okay. Hey, Benno, thanks for the talk. I actually got two questions which somehow relate to what Mariana just said, but in a more provocative manner, perhaps. You introduced your talk by being really skeptical or critical of renewable energies, and they wouldn't like really substitute fossil fuels, but rather to come on top of them, and they were not a real change. Then you ended up giving an example for convivial infrastructures that actually had to do with renewable energies, for which the materials, I guess, the indigenous communities will not be able to provide for self-sufficiently. So this would also be like rely on the same global market dynamics that renewables need. So how do you see this tension, and what do you say about the democratic potential of renewable energies that was like stressed from the go on, like from Hermann Scheer and so on, that actually through decentralization would offer a great potential for more convivial infrastructures, as I say. So this was the first question, and the other one is in the phase of imminent danger, which the climate catastrophe certainly is one striking example for. Is it really realistic to think about a radical change in infrastructures rather than in tightening control over nature, as you say? I mean, we just lived through the pandemic where, of course, what we did as humanity was rely on highly energy intensive pharmaceutical infrastructures to somehow contain the virus and not to figure out how to biocentrically cohabitate with the virus. We just wanted to put everything we had into this, and this was like a public outcry for this, and states were expected to deliver. When I think of the current state in which the climate catastrophe is already in, what it's actually the realistic chance through a radical change in doing things more grassroots level wise to contribute to the solution?
Those were indeed some more provocative formulations. Benno, would you like to collect one more question, or shall we start with a round of answers?
Actually, I think that 3 is a good number, and since it was 3 questions, I would rather start.
Okay, because Manuel already made 2 questions.
Yeah,
so.
Manuel counted for 2.
Okay, so Richard, a moment of patience, please. Benno, you're muted.
Yeah, first, Mariana, regarding the question of public policies and degrowth, and I think you also mentioned planetary boundaries, so lots of things. First of all, maybe I think the most what is most easy to answer is the relationship to degrowth and to approaches that rather have a market critical approach, a market critical perspective. Degrowth is certainly one of them, and I see a big relationship to, I mean, convivialism and degrowth. This is there's a big relationship, and I think rather that convivialism, the idea of encompasses degrowth, so it can be part of degrowth, and therefore also infrastructures in this regard can that I just presented have a there's a close relationship to infrastructures that not only serve the idea of production, competition, but of collaboration, of reproduction. So I think this is really, there's really a close relationship to that. And this also brings me to the point that Manuel mentioned, the idea of decentralization. I think this is a very important argument between centralizing energy and power and decentralizing energy power. And there's really some, which I did not mention in the talk, some really important literature research coming from energy geographies that focus on the intertwinement of decentralized energy and centralized energy in relationship to democracy. So, and there's obviously a clear tendency, and this is why it was good, Manuel, that you mentioned Hermann Scheer, of this idea of decentralized energy, that the availability of energy, and this idea, what we also have in Germany, of Bürgerinnenergiewende, has a potential to develop small democratic decision-making processes on the local level, so bottom-up processes. This also relates to degrowth, but it has not necessarily be degrowth. that can also be integrated into ecological modernization schemes. And this is what I also found a bit critical about Dominique Boyer's idea of revolutionary infrastructure, because he, in a paper, he refers to the idea of revolutionary infrastructure with regards of Hermann Scheer and the idea of the German Energiewende. And well, I think it has the potential for a repoliticization, for more democratic community building through decentralization. It is not, in that sense, revolutionary, because it is not automatically a transformative change with regards to abandoning of markets and so on and so on. And this is also a reason why I focused on why I presented here the two decolonial initiatives, because I think that they, through decolonizing, have a far more transformative power what is happening there. So this is also a reason for that. Regarding public policies, yeah, I think this is something I wished I could say more about, which would, I think, I would be possible to do it with more empirical insights into, for example, the Solutionary Rail Initiative, because what they are doing with the Solutionary Rail Initiative is to become part of public policy planning. And I think this is very important for these kind of infrastructural developments, of these decolonizing infrastructural developments, to not only be seen separate from public policy, but to have a dialogue with public policy processes. So these public policy processes in this regard, in terms of these infrastructural bottom-up initiatives, are highly important. So not to take them as separate spheres, but to combine them in dialogues. So this is also very important. I don't know if I covered all of these aspects, but I think that I mentioned already some aspects that you highlighted. So I think that we can go to the next questions then.
Okay, great. So next is Richard.
Okay, I think I want to re-emphasize a point that Manuel tried to make, and that was the question of, staying below 1.5 degrees, or, the temporality of the energy transition or climate action. And I really like your analytical ideas and the focus of, trying to understand how we're reproducing current power relations. And I think that's really important. But the other side of the coin is to try to be fast and to, shut down coal plants as fast as possible. And I was wondering what your reflections are like on scalability. How do we do this in lots of communities at the same time within the next 20 years? Or that is the most important question for me. Thank you.
No, I also remember that I forgot one of Manuel's questions, but I will answer this together with your question.
Great. So we have one more question by Stephanie Wolf.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I'm aware that I'm speaking a different language because I'm an energy economist and working for a policymaker. So I'm responsible for putting up those infrastructures. So I was wondering whether you have any concrete like action plans for us, impulses for action. What can we do regarding putting up charging infrastructure for electric vehicles in Europe, hydrogen infrastructure for transportation in Europe? So like, I'm missing some numbers here. I need numbers, facts and figures for my work. So, or you can tell me where I can find them. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for joining us. And I understand that also we speak a different language than you do. So it's great to know that we have a diverse audience here today. So for now, we don't have further questions. So Benno, I would open another round of answers, and we still have some time. So whoever else wants to make a comment or raise some questions, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, then I would like to go to Richard's questions about the urgency matter, and which is also a bit related, I think, to Manuel's question before about being critical on renewable energy on the one hand, and sort of embracing them when they are decolonial on the other hand. And this, how does this fit together, and what is the tension behind this? I think what I maybe this is also not. I think this is also important maybe for Stephanie. What I presented basically is, on the one hand, I mean, it's a mixture of kind of analytical perspectives and also normative suggestion or normative claims that are being making. So I'm quite aware of that. What I think is really important, and this was also because I mentioned the importance of being critical of the emerging hydrogen economy, of being aware of what is the potential for democratic hydrogen futures. So, for example, I mentioned this in this one slide. I think in the current political discourse, this sometimes gets forgotten. So lots of critical perspectives are being framed in an either-or perspective. And I think what I really wanted to do with this lecture, with this talk, is to say, on the one hand, okay, it is important to be critical of renewable energies. It is very important to be critical of energy technologies because, as I explained before, from political ecology's perspectives, there are lots of hidden socio-ecological harms in these energy technologies. So, and this kind of aspects are currently forgotten in mainstream sustainability discourses. So, and there's lots more. There's currently also coming a little more critical voices in terms of carbon capture and storage technologies, which is publicly being debated right now in terms of, okay, Norway can do it, they have the experiences, but in Germany we don't want that because we're afraid of earthquakes. But basically that's it. So this question of carbon lock-in, so the idea that if we focus very much on carbon capture and storage, what we are risking is basically to forget about alternatives, to forget about emancipatory alternatives, and specifically with regards to indigenous communities. This is not so much a topic in Europe, except in northern Scandinavia, but this is very much a topic in the US, Canada. This is a very, very big topic in the global south. So in almost every part of the world, this issue of indigenous communities that are being excluded from these processes. It is very important to keep this in mind and to have this justice dimension very present in these debates. And specifically in terms of hydrogen and renewable energy, this is often forgotten. And that's why I wanted to, and then this is very normative, the normative part of my talk, it was important for me to show there are alternatives. It is not technologies are inherently bad, but there are also technological and infrastructural approaches that try to strive for sustainability, for environmental justice through infrastructuring in a decolonial way. And this is something which also fascinates me. And I think this is very interesting to have this in mind. So to answer Manuel's question, the tension between being critical of renewable energies does not exclude of does not forbid, on the other hand, to show in how far through renewable energies, through infrastructure projects like the solutionary rail initiatives, there are also ways of reaching for greater environmental justice and for sovereignty and for independency and for autonomy in this regard. But it is at the same time important to be critical about this. And as soon as starting to engage critically with these initiatives, I think this would be also very important to ask, where do the resources come from? So as soon as indigenous communities use solar panels, they are embedded in the same value chain, in the same political ecologies like other companies. So they are also embedded in these companies. How do they deal with these kind of injustices? That would be important questions. For now, I don't have any answers of them, but I can only say it is like I'm critical with centralized renewable energy in terms of green hydrogen production. It should also be important to be critical in terms of these initiatives that I have shown. Nevertheless, there comes the normative point of view. It is also possible, and I'm not absolutely detached researcher without any positionality. It is absolutely possible to go there with a very first of all to be critical of them, but also to go there with the idea that these infrastructure projects can have a very emancipatory power and can have a very transformative potential also. So I think it is possible to be both, be critical of renewable energies and to celebrate them on the other hand, when they are embedded in a system, in power structures that are engaging with issues specifically of justice, and this is basically important. So and then both of you mentioned the idea of urgency with regards to pandemic and so on. Yeah, this is a good point, specifically with geoengineering economies. So there are lots of voices. We can't have the luxury anymore to say no to geoengineering technologies. We also do not have the luxury to say no to renewable energy. We do not have the time for that. So time is running out. This is a very valid and very good, very important argument, and I'm also convinced about that time is running out. Nevertheless, this idea that time is running out, this urgency argument, cannot be used as a how is it in English, as a Freibrief, as a legitimacy to follow these paths without any critical engagement or without any embracing, for example, of decolonial infrastructuring. So, and these are the points I wanted to make. And after all, there is a tension. There will always be a tension between this urgency issue and being critical of renewable energy. Nevertheless, this urgency debate also risks of depoliticizing sustainability debates, and it is always at the same time very important to be critical of them and to look for bottom-up initiatives, for decentralized initiatives, to strengthen them and to show and also to investigate and how far. This brings me back to the point of public policy and how far they can be integrated into public policy programs and how far they are being respected, recognized. These again are questions of procedural and recognitional justice, first of all. Yeah, I hope that I somehow answered some of these aspects, and I really thank you also for being so critical, because these are also questions that come to my mind soon. You know the situation. You're preparing this kind of lecture, being critical of renewable energy, and then you go out here in the radio some news about we need more renewable energy because time is running out. And then I think, okay, I can't be critical about this, and this actually is true. And the same with carbon capture and storage. There are good reasons to use carbon capture and storage, but there are also very good reasons to be very critical about this. So it has to be both. And Stephanie. Actually, the only thing I can say is that I'm really happy that you are joining this lecture. And really, we just, before that, we had a discussion about building bridges to different disciplines and being aware of language and being aware of how can we engage with policymakers and also with people coming from economics and from engineering. Yeah, I just have to say I don't have the answers, but I think it has to be that we as a rather critical scholar have to be very aware of this kind of language. And I think Manuel just said it in the meeting before. You also have to be very aware of this terminology, for example, of eco-managerialism. So if that would mean that all the people that are celebrating renewable energies are naive eco-managerialists, that would be a wrong way, because I think there are lots of people that are also very critical of what they're doing and also have a very ethical, normative point of view. And yeah, I think we have to be aware of how we use language and how we do critical research. But thanks for being here.
Okay, Anke has a question or a comment.
Yes, thank you for your talk, Benno. I would be curious to hear, because so far we still haven't touched upon restorative justice, and to what extent the infrastructure lens can also help talking about restorative justice, because so far we only talked about future infrastructures kind of. And for example, I was just thinking about brownfields and how the perspective of infrastructures and talking about already existing infrastructures can help also talking about a just transition, if that makes sense. Did someone understand my question?
Could you maybe explain what brownfields are?
Like old, how do I explain it? Industriebrachen in German.
Ah. Yes. So for now, we don't have additional questions or comments. Maybe I would just briefly complement the former discussion about also numbers and effects and urgency. The only thing that also, Benno, you mentioned the carbon lock-in. And I would also like the one number or one graphic that you had with numbers in your presentation was the development of energy sources. And I would also say, like, if we look at the rebounds effect, which is basically the more renewables we have, we are still emitting ever more CO2 and climate gases. So I think that that's like a development that we have to be very aware of. And I think that's at the basis of when we look at the numbers and speak about like this modernization trail versus a transformation pathway. So where does this modernization pathway lead us? Does it lead us really to reduce our emissions, switching to electric cars and to hydrogen? Or does it help us to reduce it overall? And I would say, like, when it's about building infrastructure, and Benno, I would be happy to hear also your opinion on that. For electric vehicles, for example, in Germany or in Europe, is this like directed to individual cars and to like what size of cars, or is it like about more like a car sharing model, or like where does, for example, the car sector, where should it go? Like what's the general view behind that, this way that we choose? Because I think there's also a big broad range of where we could head towards with e-mobility. So yeah, Benno, I think it's you again, and then we see if more comments or questions come up.
Thank you, Anke, for this issue of restorative justice. And it's true that I did not focus it, and I did not really include it in my talk. And I think with the two examples that I briefly illustrated, the Solutionary Rail Initiative and also the green hydrogen initiatives, community green hydrogen initiatives of First Nation communities, show really, or might show really nicely in how far brownfields are being used for their own purposes, and how they sort of reclaim land, reclaim industrial infrastructures, fossil fuel infrastructures for their purposes. So I read an article about this idea of bright green hydrogen, which is hydrogen being produced not from water through electrolysis, but from wood waste. So, and I don't know exactly how this works technically, but I read about this, and there was also the idea about using old old technical energy infrastructures, old infrastructures of mining companies for these purposes. So there basically also is the idea of using the old, of repurposing the old for new decolonial issues. So this is really an interesting aspect. And also in terms of the Solutionary Rail Initiative, that is, from my point of view, it is really fascinating that one of the traditional tools of colonialism, namely the rail work initiative, the rail work, is being used in a decolonial way to reclaim this idea of rights of way over territorial indigenous territories. So, and this is sort of the idea of also the idea that indigenous communities, First Nations in this regard, are not being tied to their territory. They live there, but they're highly mobile also in terms of using the train, that they're also a part of the modern society as other people are as well. So, and I think there are aspects of restorative justice that are really important to have in mind. And after all, all this thinking of infrastructures in terms of decoloniality always adheres the past, because the infrastructure, old fossil fuel infrastructure, always has, specifically if you look at the US, at North America, has this colonizing issue, because it is a tool of colonizing land, a tool of colonizing territories, of indigenous territories. And so to turn this the other way, from my point of view, is really an interesting aspect of restorative justice also. Yeah, your aspect of, Alexandra, your question about my reflections on ecological modernization pathways, I think that specifically, if you look at the European global North European case, if you look at Germany, there is a huge hegemony of the ecological modernization path. So it is really difficult to change it. And I also don't know if it is really useful, and this is also why I'm a little bit critical of this idea of revolutionary infrastructure, idea of to turn everything upside down, to end ecological modernization in total, because I think it's not, in that way, it's not really realistic. And what I think in this regard is basically that you mentioned transport infrastructures. There will, the pathway, I cannot look in the future, but from my point of view, is that the hegemony of this ecological modernization in terms of infrastructure, transportability is so strong that it will continue in that way. But there's also a tendency, and when I look at the hydrogen discussions, that it's that individual mobility in terms of cars should not be fueled with electricity. And then there comes the argument, interestingly, there comes the argument, oh, they're not so clean as everyone says, but it's instrumentalized by, for example, proponents of the hydrogen economy that sort of argue hydrogen is much more clean fuel, which you can use for transport. And there's this, in the hydrogen debate, there's this debate between champagne and table water. So champagne on the one hand would be to use hydrogen only for sectors which are really hard to abate, which are really hard to electrify, such as industrial sectors, steel, chemical, cement industry, and so on. And to use hydrogen as table water, metaphorically speaking, would then be to use it for every purpose that you can imagine. This would also mean electric cars and so on and so on and so on. And to change electric cars into fuel cell cars, to use them for to use hydrogen also for individual mobility. And I think this is an aspect when you really have to pay attention, because that does not make sense. That does not make any sense in terms of energy efficiency, because hydrogen is so energy intensive. It is so costly to produce. It is right now. It is still there's almost no green hydrogen on the world. So more than 99% of the current hydrogen production is not green. It is so-called brown or gray hydrogen that is based on fossil fuels. So this, of course, for certain sectors, industrial sectors, but also freight transport, it can be an option in the long-term future. But you have to be aware of the backdrop. But I cannot look in the future. But the only thing that I can say is I think this ecological modernization process is very, very strong. And this was an argument that I made earlier in the presentation, particularly in certain contexts in which that are not stable in a political sense. There is also increasingly a tendency that this ecological modernization path is being permeated by this idea of control, authoritarian top-down politics, and so to even produce a much wider gap between bottom-up initiatives and ecological modernization initiatives.
Great. We have one more hand raised by Niklas Schäfer, and I think that will be our last question or comment for today, probably.
Yeah, thank you, Benno, for your wonderful lecture. I have one question. I don't know if you have touched that point during your work on infrastructures. And I was wondering about the connection between infrastructures and geopolitics. I was particularly thinking about with for example, this huge power which oil states like the US or Saudi Arabia and so on have, and now where we might see a shift to renewable energies like green hydrogen and so on. If you see are there shifts in geopolitics, or how, or also on a general level, how infrastructure is used for geopolitical reasons?
Yeah, absolutely. They are highly geopolitical. There's a huge geopolitical dimension to infrastructure. I left this out a little bit to focus more on this conviviality aspects, on this issue of justice, and more on the analytical perspective. But I think, and this is, you just have to look at the news right now. I mean, the explosion of the pipeline in the Barents Sea, and what I think is just maybe one remark on this geopolitical dimension of infrastructures is what I found really interesting was the remark by Christian Lindner from the Liberal Party in Germany, who said that renewable energies are freedom infrastructure, I think, to get rid of the dependencies from authoritarian states. And in this regard, of course, he meant Russia. So to gain greater independency. And this is basically one of the most central arguments for, in a political sense, of renewable energies that was made up by Hermann Scheer, that was developed by lots of advocates of energy democracy, of decentralizing energy. And it's really, really interesting to see how now one of the leaders of a political party that in the past has not really been related to these kind of initiatives of energy democracy, Bürgerinnenenergiewende, and so on, that he uses this term, and he did it in a so he did it in a way that I think that people believed, I cannot talk for everyone, but I think that there were lots of people who believed that, okay, now he has a good point. This is a good argument. And but just this remark that in terms of now there comes a situation that was unprecedented, and that people like Christian Lindner and so on, I think, were really frightened about. And when they heard of this emancipatory potential, this freedom potential that you can have with renewable energy, it was opportune. It was a good opportunity to them, for them. So, and I think there right now, what I want to say with this is that right now, among the different political directions and political parties, there is an increasing awareness that through infrastructuring you can change your geopolitical relations in terms of greater dependency, but also freedom. But I think Lindner is also wrong when he just says, okay, renewable energies are per se infrastructures of freedom. You also have to look at the way how you engage with them, because at the same time, he's also very much in favor of green energy, of green hydrogen, as the new fuel of the future and so on. So he also is an advocate of these discourses. And these are new dependencies that are being created there. And I don't know if this is really the idea of freedom that he meant. So in that regard, he was speaking of that because he's coming from the party of freedom, from the Liberal Party. So it was really a good opportunity for him to use this. But after all, I think that he is not, that this is not really, that it's not enough only to talk of renewable energies as freedom energies, but to think of the power relations in which they are embedded, in the way they are being controlled, who has access to them, who controls them. And these are very, very important aspects. And just only to embrace them as the new freedom infrastructures is difficult from my point of view. Nevertheless, this geopolitical dimension is huge at the moment right now, and it's really interesting to see how there's an increasing awareness.
Wonderful. So I guess this was a very broad and interesting discussion that we also had based on your presentation. And it's wonderful to have this geographical perspectives also in our lecture series, because we have had many different perspectives. So while closing this lecture for today, I would like to invite you to follow us in our newsletter, follow us on the webpage and on our YouTube channel. You can watch all the previous lectures that we had. There's also a summary video of the main discussion points we had last year. It's like a 10-minute video that summarizes the main points of the different lectures, the different first 12 lectures that we had. So thank you very much for joining us. And I hope to see you in the following lectures that we will announce soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, Benno.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.
And the good questions.